I want you to just imagine for a second that you're walking into a stone tomb in the remote Scottish Highlands.
Oh, yeah. Dress warmly for that.
Right, exactly.
Huh.
It is freezing, the wind is just howling off the sea, and you've got this massive structure of dry stone walls that's been sitting out there in the elements for, over 5,000 years.
It's an incredible setting.
It is. But when you step inside, you don't find these beautifully laid out skeletons resting peacefully. You find basically just piles of completely fragmented, shattered, commingled bones, just stacked and scattered everywhere across these stone benches.
Yeah, which is pretty much a chaotic scene for any archaeologist to encounter.
I can imagine.
I mean, you're looking at human remains that have been exposed to the weather, deliberately moved around by the living, and, layered over multiple generations. For decades, the absolute best we could do with a site like this was, carbon date the fragments.
Right.
And maybe, if we were lucky, determine the approximate age or biological sex of a few individuals based on, the shape of a pelvis or a jawbone.
But the science has actually taken a massive leap forward lately. Today, researchers are going back into those exact same tombs, sampling those tiny, shattered bone fragments, and somehow they are mapping out the specific family trees of the people inside.
Which is just mind-blowing.
It really is. We're talking about identifying grandfathers, fathers, sons, and uncles from a literal pile of bone shards.
Yeah.
It's like we're essentially reading the intimate biological guest list of a 5,000-year-old family reunion.
And that fundamentally changes what archaeology can even achieve. We aren't just cataloging old stones and random bone fragments anymore. We are reconstructing the active biological webs of prehistoric communities.
And so that is our mission for this deep dive. We are exploring two really remarkable papers published in the journal Antiquity. There's a summary article and a comprehensive research paper, both by lead authors Vicki Cummings and Chris Fowler.
Excellent papers, both of them.
Yeah, totally. We're going to examine how cutting-edge ancient DNA analysis is solving these prehistoric cold cases from the Scottish Neolithic period. So that's roughly 3,800 to 3,200 BC.
Right in that window, yeah.
By the end of our discussion today, you're going to see how science is revealing not just who these ancient people were, but how they used these massive stone monuments to literally build their bloodlines into the landscape.
So to really grasp the sheer scale of this achievement, we need to set the geographical stage first. We are looking at the extreme north of Britain.
Way up there.
Exactly. Specifically Caithness, which is the northernmost tip of the Scottish mainland, and the Orkney Islands, which are sitting just across this notoriously dangerous stretch of water called the Pentland Firth.
Right.
During the early Neolithic era, communities here were undergoing this massive cultural transition.
Because they were the first farmers in the region, right?
Yes, exactly. They were adopting a completely new agricultural lifestyle, managing cattle and sheep, bringing in new technologies like pottery. But one of the most visible cultural shifts they adopted was a very specific architectural tradition for their dead.
The stalled cairn.
The stalled cairn, yeah. If you were to walk up to one of these today, you'd see a large mound of stones encircling a central chamber. And the chamber itself is built using dry stone walling. So, stones carefully stacked without any mortar.
Right.
But the defining feature, the reason they're called stalled cairns, is the use of these large, upright stone slabs. They're set at right angles to the main wall, so they protrude into the main chamber space.
Oh, so they function almost like partitions then, breaking a single long room into distinct compartments or stalls.
Exactly. And within these stalls, the builders often placed horizontal stone slabs to act as benches or shelves. So it's a highly structured, divided room, not just a simple pit in the ground.
And that structural division is crucial to how these spaces were actually used, because the osteological analysis, the detailed study of the bones, found a minimum of 37 individuals across 5 of these excavated tombs.
37, yeah.
But as we established at the start, they were completely mixed up. And this wasn't due to random natural decay or grave robbing, right? The evidence heavily points to secondary deposition.
Yes. Which means the tomb wasn't the first place these people were laid to rest.
Wait, really? So where were they before?
Well, the bodies must have decayed somewhere else first. Perhaps they were exposed to the elements or temporarily buried in the earth somewhere. But once the soft tissue was completely gone, the surviving community gathered up the dry bones and brought them into the stalled cairns.
Wow. Okay, so that process definitely explains the fragmentation. Because moving dry, brittle bones inevitably leads to breakage.
It does. But it also reveals this deeply tactile relationship with the dead. The bones were meticulously gathered and, physically manipulated by the living.
There is this one visceral detail in the research that highlights this perfectly, I think. At a mainland tomb called Tulloch of Assery A, researchers examined a specific cluster of remains labeled Bone Group B.
Ah, yes.
And the bones in this group had been intentionally coated in clay before being placed on the stone bench.
Right, and think about what that means. Coating the bones in clay transforms the act from a simple disposal into a deeply intimate ritual. Someone had to sit there, mix the clay, and apply it by hand to the remains of their ancestors. It just shows that these bones retained massive social and personal significance long after the person had died.
And the people ending up in these tombs reflect the really harsh reality of the era, too.
Yeah.
Like among the adults, they found the remains of a neonate, a newborn infant.
Yeah, that was a tough discovery.
And when they analyzed the infant's porous bones, they found clear lesions indicating scurvy.
Scurvy, which is a severe vitamin C deficiency. And for a newborn to show those skeletal markers, the mother must have been profoundly malnourished during the pregnancy.
That's just incredibly sad.
It is. It's a really stark reminder of the fragile human struggle for survival in the Neolithic North. I mean, a brutally hard winter or a failed harvest could easily lead to this kind of systemic malnutrition.
Right.
So these massive stone monuments, they weren't built by a society with endless leisure time, They were built by people living on the very edge of survival.
Which I guess brings us to the central methodological problem of this entire study. If you look at that same tomb, Assery A, you have a 5-year-old, a 15-year-old, and an adult all tangled together in a single bone group.
Yep, a complete mix.
I just keep thinking of it like a multi-generational family reunion that's been put through a blender. If the bones are fragmented and they're coated in clay and mixed together after being moved around, how on earth do scientists assign a specific DNA profile to a specific individual? I mean, you can't just look at a random femur and a jawbone and know they belong to the same person.
Right, you absolutely can't. And that is where the sophistication of modern ancient DNA or aDNA analysis comes in. Researchers don't just swab the outside of the bones anymore.
Okay, so what do?
They seek out the absolute densest bones in the human body. Typically, that's the petrous bone, which is this tiny pyramid-shaped part of the skull near the inner ear, or they use the roots of the teeth.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because these highly dense areas preserve genetic material far better than porous bones do.
So they literally drill into these specific fragments to extract the genetic material.
Yes, exactly. They sequence the genome from multiple fragments across the whole tomb.
Yeah.
And by comparing the genetic markers, they can identify when two separate fragments share the exact same genetic code.
Meaning they belong to the same person.
Exactly. So once they've digitally reconstructed these discrete genetic profiles from the fragmented physical remains, well, then they can start comparing the profiles to each other to look for shared segments of DNA.
Wow.
And that is how they determine if two people are first-degree, second-degree, or third-degree relatives.
That is amazing. And they actually managed to extract usable, sequenceable DNA from 22 of the individuals across these 5 tombs, which, for organic material spanning 5 millennia, is a remarkably high success rate.
It really is unprecedented for this region.
Yeah. And the most glaring pattern that emerged from this data was this overwhelming patrilineal bias.
Yes. The genetic mapping showed that biologically male individuals buried in the same tombs or in neighboring tombs were closely related to one another along the male line.
Okay.
The family tree was essentially fundamentally anchored by the men.
The specific maps of these family trees are just fascinating to look at. Like at a mainland tomb called Ratar East, the DNA confirmed the presence of 2 brothers.
Yep.
And then out on the Orkney Islands at the Tomb of Holm of Papua North, the researchers identified a father and a son. And buried right alongside them was another man whose genetic overlap indicated he was either the maternal uncle or the half-brother to the father.
So you really start to see a deliberate curation of the dead here. The people managing these tombs were making very specific choices about who belonged inside based on strict familial ties.
But the ultimate confirmation of this spatial and genetic curation was found at Tulloch of Assery A. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Assery is the gold mine.
The researchers identified 3 direct generations there: a father, his son, and his grandson. But they weren't just tossed into the chamber randomly. All 3 of them were found placed near each other in a specific western alcove of the tomb, sharing the exact same stone bench.
Which is incredible when you think about the mechanics of memory required for that to happen.
What do you mean?
Well, those three men did not die at the same time. Because of the secondary burial practice, their bones may have been introduced to the tomb decades apart.
Oh, right. Because they had to decay somewhere else first.
Exactly. So whoever was managing that sacred space remembered exactly which stone bench held the grandfather, and they deliberately ensured that the son and the grandson were physically reunited with him in that specific alcove, years or decades later.
That is just wow. And the network of kinship extended beyond the walls of a single tomb, too. Just 200 meters away from Assery A is another tomb called Tulloch and Assery.
Yes, a neighboring site.
Right. And the DNA revealed that a male buried there was an uncle, half-brother, or grandfather to the first male we just mentioned in the Assery A tomb. So this biological web stretched across the landscape.
It demonstrates that these distinct tombs were not isolated projects. They belonged to a much wider community of kin groups who knew exactly how they were related to the people in the neighboring structures.
But, looking at this heavy patrilineal bias, fathers, sons, brothers, all anchoring these tombs, the obvious missing piece of the puzzle here is the women.
Right, the boys' club narrative.
Exactly. If the men are remaining with their ancestral tombs, deductive reasoning suggests the society practiced exogamy, meaning the women must have been moving between different settlements and communities for marriage. Does the genetic data actually support that?
It supports it definitively, actually. To track this, the researchers looked at mitochondrial DNA.
Which is inherited from the mother, right?
Yes, it's a separate genome inherited strictly from the mother. So if the women were staying in the same communities as the men, you'd expect to see a lot of shared mitochondrial lineages.
Makes sense.
But instead, among the 22 individuals tested, they found 19 completely distinct female lineages.
19 out of 22. That is an incredibly high level of diversity for such a small sample size.
It really is. It implies a vast dynamic network of movement. The women were coming into these communities from many different diverse outside groups. And furthermore, the researchers found 0 mother-daughter pairs buried together in any of the 5 tombs.
0, which confirms the daughters were leaving their birth communities to join new ones while the sons stayed behind.
Precisely.
But I think the most striking piece of evidence regarding this movement involves the geography we mentioned earlier, because the Orkney Islands and the Caithness mainland are separated by the Pentland Firth.
Right, that dangerous water crossing.
And the DNA analysis revealed that 2 of the women buried out in the island tombs of Orkney were actually distant genetic relatives, so roughly 4th or 5th degree to males buried back on the mainland in Caithness.
Just try to picture that crossing. These women were navigating treacherous waters to marry into new communities. They were the literal connective tissue linking the island settlements with the mainland settlements.
Wow.
While the men acted as the geographical anchors, staying near their ancestral stone monuments, the women were weaving the broader social fabric together across vast distances. They were essentially the diplomats bridging these prehistoric societies.
That's a great way to put it. It highlights this really complex, interdependent social structure where mobility and fixed ancestry had to work together. But as we look at the timeline of these tombs, there is an anomaly in the data that reveals how the meaning of these monuments shifted over the centuries.
Ah, yes.
The intruder. Let's talk about the intruder. At the tomb of Tulloch of Assery A, researchers were testing the fragmented bones and mapping out these Neolithic lineages when they sequenced the genome of an individual labeled I36224. And he did not fit the pattern at all.
Not even a little bit. First off, his Y chromosome DNA was completely distinct from the Neolithic farmers we've been discussing. He belonged to a haplogroup, which is, think of it as a deep ancestral barcode called R1b M269.
Okay.
And in the context of European prehistory, this specific barcode tells us he descended from the corded ware culture.
Right, and these were the groups who swept across Europe from the eastern steppes, bringing different languages, distinct pottery, and new technologies long after the Neolithic period.
Yeah, so he's from a completely different demographic population. And the radiocarbon dating confirmed his temporal displacement. This individual died during the Bronze Age.
The Bronze Age?
Yeah, over a millennium after the stalled cairns were originally built and used by the early farmers.
So over 1,000 years later, a genetically distinct man is just placed into this ancient Neolithic tomb. And the skeletal evidence points to a really violent end. He was a physically larger individual, and researchers actually found a leaf-shaped arrowhead embedded deeply in his lower spine.
Ouch. Yeah, finding a Bronze Age casualty in a Neolithic tomb is a profound testament to the enduring psychological power of these monuments. I mean, by the Bronze Age, the original builders were long forgotten, and the society had completely transformed.
Right.
Yet this massive stone structure remained a potent, perhaps even intimidating landmark in the landscape. Whether this man was, a revered local leader trying to claim ancient power or an executed enemy being discarded in a feared place, his burial there was a massive ideological statement.
It definitely shows how the tombs transcended their original biological purpose to become these permanent fixtures of social memory. Exactly. But if the presence of this Bronze Age intruder proves that these tombs were visually and socially powerful for over 1,000 years, it begs the question, how did the original Neolithic builders design them to hold that kind of power in the first place?
Well, the authors of the paper introduce a really great concept to explain this. They call the tombs technologies of descent and affinity.
Technologies of descent. I like that.
Right. It frames the architecture not merely as a passive container for the dead, but as an active tool used by the living. Because in an oral culture, memories inevitably fade. A few generations down the line, the specific deeds of a great-grandfather might be totally forgotten.
Sure.
But if you physically anchor that ancestor inside an immovable multi-ton stone structure and you ritually place his descendants alongside him, you are basically weaponizing memory. You're making that lineage permanent, proving your ongoing claim to the territory and to each other.
And the researchers observed two very different architectural strategies for using this technology, depending on the geography. Let's start with the mainland, the Caithness strategy.
Okay, so in Caithness, particularly around Loch Calder, the kin groups employed a strategy of clustering. They built their monumental tombs incredibly close to one another.
Like, how close are we talking?
Well, Assery A and Assery B are situated a mere 30 meters apart.
Wow, that is close.
Yeah. And the other tomb, Tulloch of Assery A, is just 200 meters away.
So they are completely intervisible. Like, you could stand at one tomb and clearly see the others.
Absolutely.
But despite sharing the exact same landscape, and despite the DNA proving these groups were genetically related, they made each tomb architecturally distinct. Tulloch of Assery A features a single box-like chamber. Assery A has two opposing chambers, and Assery B features a tripartite, or three-part chamber.
It's a delicate negotiation of identity, really. They are using proximity to demonstrate their broad affinity, like, hey, we belong to the same overarching clan, but they're using architectural variation to assert their distinct subgroup identities.
It's basically like looking at two different types of ancient branding. In Caithness, the physical closeness of the tombs is the brand. I keep thinking of it like a traditional family compound.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. You show you belong to the larger group by building your monument right next door on the family plot, but you adjust the floor plan to show which specific branch of the family you are. Now contrast that with the strategy out on the Orkney Islands.
The geography of Orkney forced a completely different approach. The tombs out there were built in highly isolated locations, they were deliberately set away from existing settlements, and they were generally not intervisible.
Because the landscape naturally dispersed the communities.
Exactly. But the branding strategy just adapted. While the island tombs were isolated, the archaeologists found that the living people in Orkney began building dry stone houses for themselves that directly mimicked the architecture of the tombs.
Wait, so the domestic homes of the living were designed to look like the monuments of the dead?
Yes. When distance separates your community, you have to rely on shared architectural blueprints to maintain that web of affinity. So in Caithness, proximity did the heavy lifting for social cohesion, but in Orkney, the blueprint is the brand.
It's like the family spreading out to the suburbs, where they live miles apart. But everyone insists on painting their house the exact same unique color so everyone knows what clan they belong to.
That's exactly it. By making sure your house matches the ancestral tomb down to the very last stone, you signal your allegiance to the lineage, even if you live miles and miles apart.
It's just a brilliant use of physical space to solve a social problem. And I think that brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this research. These early farmers did not just pile rocks to dispose of remains. They used carefully curated bone and monumental stone to weave a permanent physical web.
The authors really emphasize that for these Neolithic communities, tracing their social connections wasn't a luxury. It was a fundamental survival mechanism. When you're introducing a new agricultural way of life to a harsh, unforgiving environment, you need to know exactly who has your back. You need to know who you can rely on for trade when your crops fail, and who you can safely marry to build alliances.
Because the environment was just so brutal.
Exactly. Establishing these irrefutable lines of kinship was just as vital to their survival as their cattle, their pottery, or their stone axes.
And while our technology today is vastly different, the underlying human impulse remains entirely unchanged.
Oh, absolutely.
If you look at the popularity of massive genealogical databases or like mail-in DNA testing kits, we are clearly still driven by the need to track our ancestry. We still want to leave a physical or digital mark to prove that we belong to a continuing lineage. The motivation is exactly the same today as it was 5,000 years ago on the freezing shores of Loch Calder.
We're continually trying to map our place in the world and secure our connection to the past and the future. We've simply swapped out dry stone cairns for genetic sequencing and digital servers.
Which leaves you with a provocative thought to consider today. If archaeologists 5,000 years from now were to excavate our modern world, perhaps digging through our structured cemeteries or somehow decoding our digital ancestry profiles from the ruins of a data center, what technologies of descent would they think we use to prove who we belong to?
That is a great question.
And more importantly, when they look at our scattered data, what profound invisible social connections might they completely miss? Because they too will be looking at a multi-generational family reunion that has essentially been put through a blender.
It certainly makes you wonder what our remaining fragments will ultimately say about us.